The air in the room is thick with the cloying smoke of imported Cuban cigars and the scent of old leather and gun oil. Klaus Richter, former SS Standartenführer and current patriarch of a Nazi empire in exile, places a faded, sepia-toned photograph on the polished mahogany desk. His eyes, the pale, flat color of a winter sky over the Baltic, lock onto the man seated opposite him. The man he knows as Franz Bauer. The man who is, in fact, David Rosenthal of the Mossad, operational codename Adler. The photograph shows a smiling family of four, captured in a moment of pre-war innocence. A man, his arm around his wife. A boy and a younger girl standing in front. It was taken in a Berlin park, 1938. It is Adler's family. He has not seen this specific image in 25 years. Not since the night the Gestapo kicked down their apartment door and the world ended. Richter leans forward, the expensive leather of his chair groaning in protest. A collector in Munich, a specialist in ephemera from our moment of glory, sent this to me, he says, his voice a low, gravelly rasp honed by years of shouting orders and cheap cigarettes. He thought it might be of interest. He deals in artifacts from the old days. This one, he tells me, was found tucked inside a copy of Mein Kampf at a former Gestapo records facility in the Thuringian forest. A curious place for a family photo, wouldn't you agree? Do you recognize them, Franz? The heavy black forest clock on the mantelpiece ticks, a relentless mechanical heartbeat. Each tick is a hammer blow against Adler's sternum. His training, drilled into his very nervous system in sterile, windowless rooms in Tel Aviv, screams at him. Maintain the legend. Do not react. Franz Bauer is a former Waffen-SS officer from a Pomeranian farming family, an orphan since the age of 10. No wife, no children, no past beyond the Reich. His heart rate, monitored by his own internal discipline, is a steady 72 beats per minute. He practiced this for 1,000 hours. Biofeedback, mental fortification, the creation of a physiological fortress. But the image on the desk burns through his defenses. His mother's gentle smile, his father's proud, protective posture, his sister Sarah's missing front tooth, his own face, a boy of 8, blissfully unaware of the coming storm. He has less than a second to formulate a response. The wrong micro-expression, a fractional hesitation, a spike in his carotid artery, and the 2 guards by the door will act. They are not simple bodyguards. They are former members of the SS Sicherheitsdienst, men with the blank, loyal faces of wolves, their hands resting casually on the holsters of their Browning high-power pistols. The wrong answer, and they will put 9mm rounds through his skull without a second thought. The right answer might not be enough. This is not a question. It is a surgical instrument, a scalpel designed to peel back the 18 layers of his meticulously constructed identity. Richter is not merely testing his loyalty. He is dissecting his soul live on the operating table. Adler feels a single, cold bead of sweat trace a path down his spine. He picks up the photograph. He wills his hand to be steady, a feat of mental effort that feels like lifting a car engine. He studies it, forcing a flicker of feigned academic disinterest into his eyes. He must choose his next words with the absolute precision of a bomb disposal expert snipping the final wire. The entire operation, 18 months of deep cover penetration, the lives of the support team, the multi-million-dollar budget, and the hunt for the most wanted Nazi on Earth. All of it rests on the next 5 seconds. The story of Operation Phantom does not begin in a smoke-filled room in a heavily fortified Argentine estancia. It begins 6 years earlier, in 1960. in a cramped, windowless office on the third floor of an anonymous building in Tel Aviv. The room perpetually smells of stale Turkish coffee, overflowing ashtrays, and the faint, acidic scent of mimeograph fluid. This is the domain of Zvi Malkin, director of the Mossad. Malkin is not a man of grand gestures or imposing physicality. He is small, unassuming, with the perpetually tired eyes of a watchmaker who has spent a lifetime staring at impossibly small components under a magnifying glass. But behind those eyes is a mind that sees the world as a vast, interconnected machine of threats, levers, and opportunities. His greatest achievement is still a fresh wound on the world's conscience: the capture of Adolf Eichmann. Just months before, he had snatched the logistical architect of the Holocaust from a street in Buenos Aires, sedated him with a meticulously calculated dose of anesthetic, and smuggled him to Israel disguised in the uniform of an El Al flight attendant. It was an operation of breathtaking audacity, a defiant statement that Jewish memory was long and its reach was global. But for Malkin, Eichmann was just one component of the machine, a mid-level manager. The true ghost, the man who held the keys to the entire Nazi enterprise's financial and political legacy, remained at large. Martin Bormann, Reich leader, head of the party chancellery, Hitler's private secretary, the Brown Eminence. In the final, apocalyptic days of the Reich, as Soviet T-34s turned Berlin to rubble, Bormann had vanished. Official reports, based on the testimony of Hitler youth leader Artur Axmann, claimed he died trying to cross the Spree River. Others whispered he was killed by a Soviet artillery shell near the Lehrter Bahnhof. But the whispers that reached Malkin's desk, filtered through the global intelligence network he was building, were different. They spoke of a coordinated escape via a U-boat to Argentina, of a vast hidden fortune in Swiss numbered accounts, gold, art, and patents, worth billions. They spoke of a ruthlessly efficient network of former SS officers, the Organisation der ehemaligen SS-Angehörigen, Odessa, protecting him and funding a new Reich in the shadows. For 15 years, Bormann was a specter, a symbol of justice denied, and a potential source of funding for Israel's enemies. For Malkin, this was an unacceptable variable in the complex equation of Israel's survival. The intelligence briefing that triggered Operation Phantom was not a single dramatic revelation. It was the slow, methodical accumulation of disparate whispers, a pattern emerging from a global sea of noise. A defector from the Egyptian Mukhabarat mentioned German rocket scientists in Cairo, working on Nasser's missile program, boasting of a shadow fund from the old Reich that paid their exorbitant salaries. An intercepted telex detailing a bank transfer from the Union Bank of Switzerland in Zurich to a Paraguayan import-export company used a one-time cryptographic key, Sonnenwende, last logged in a 1945 Wehrmacht radio transmission from the Courland pocket. A Mossad Katza, or field agent, posing as a journalist in Rome, used a directional microphone to overhear two aging Italian fascists in a cafe talking about Il Segretario, living like a king in the Andean foothills, protected by our German friends. Each data point was a pinprick of light in a vast darkness. Alone, they were circumstantial, deniable. Together, they formed a constellation that pointed south. South to the continent that had become a haven for unrepentant Nazis. South America. The mission's genesis was a specific, catastrophic failure. In 1964, a joint operation with the West German Bundeskriminalamt, the BKA, attempted to infiltrate the close-knit German expatriate community in Bariloche, Argentina. The German agent, a man named Klaus Schmidt, was highly competent. But he was a post-war German policeman. He saw the Nazis as criminals to be brought to justice. He did not, and could not, understand them as a quasi-religious cult. He lasted 3 weeks. His body was found in a ravine, his rented Opel Rekord pushed off a mountain road. The official Argentine police report cited a drunk driving accident. Malkin, reading the autopsy report smuggled to him by an asset in the local morgue, knew better. The ligature marks on Schmidt's wrists and the specific pattern of fractures were inconsistent with a car crash. They were consistent with a Protocol 3 SD interrogation. The Odessa network was not a loose collection of old men drinking beer and reminiscing. It was a disciplined, paranoid, and lethal organization. They had their own counterintelligence, their own executioners. To penetrate it, you couldn't send a policeman. You had to send a ghost. You had to create a man who was more Nazi than the Nazis themselves. The player selected for this impossible role was David Rosenthal, born in Berlin, 1930. He was fluent in German, not just the language, but the dialects of Berlin, of Bavaria, of the Pomeranian flatlands. His parents were secular German Jews, highly assimilated and fiercely patriotic. They believed they were Germans first, Jews second. The Nuremberg laws taught them otherwise. David, aged 12, escaped the transport to Auschwitz only because a sympathetic neighbor, the baker Herr Schmidt, a man who had shared schnapps with his father on holidays, hid him in a flour cellar for 2 days, risking his own family's life. He spent the rest of the war as a ghost, living in barns and forests, a member of a small partisan group, surviving on stolen food, instinct, and a burning, all-consuming will to live. He made his way to British Mandate Palestine in 1947, joined the Haganah, and fought with distinction in the 1948 War of Independence, earning a reputation for coolness under fire. He was a natural intelligence officer. He possessed a gift for mimicry, an eidetic memory for faces and numbers, and an unnerving ability to suppress his own identity, to become a blank slate on which any legend could be written. For Malkin, Rosenthal's trauma was not a liability. It was his greatest weapon. He understood the enemy not as a caricature in a film, but as the men who lived next door, the men who smiled at him in the morning before they signed his family's death warrant in the afternoon. The chessboard was South America in the mid-1960s. A continent of shifting allegiances, corrupt military dictatorships, and porous borders. It was a playground for spies from the CIA, the KGB, the Stasi, and a dozen other agencies. Juan Perón's Argentina had welcomed thousands of Nazi fugitives after the war, providing them with false papers and safe haven in exchange for their technical expertise and looted gold. Alfredo Stroessner's Paraguay was a kleptocracy where anything could be bought, including absolute sanctuary for men like the Angel of Death, Joseph Mengele. This was the terrain. The mission's primary antagonist, the gatekeeper to Bormann, was identified through painstaking analysis of the network's known associates and financial transactions. SS Standartenführer Klaus Richter, a former commander in the SS Totenkopfverbände, the Death's Head units that ran the concentration camps. He was not a desk murderer like Eichmann. He was a true believer, a man of extreme violence and unshakable ideology. Intelligence indicated he had escaped through the rat lines, organized by sympathetic Catholic clergy in Italy, and now ran a large, prosperous cattle ranch in the Argentine Pampas. This ranch, the Estancia del Sol Poniente, was believed to be the nerve center for Odessa's South American operations. Richter was the lock. David Rosenthal would have to become the key. The plan, codenamed Phantom, was audacious in its simplicity, and terrifying in its complexity. Rosenthal would not just pretend to be a Nazi. He would be resurrected as one. Mossad researchers in the Historical Documentation Unit spent a year building his new identity. Franz Bauer. They found a real Waffen-SS officer with that name, same age, same general physical appearance, who was documented as having been captured by the Soviets and having died of typhus in a POW camp near Minsk in 1949. The Soviets rarely shared records with the West, making the death officially documented but practically impossible to verify. It was the perfect shell. They created an entire life for Bauer. Forged paybooks with the correct stamps and watermarks. Letters from a fictional mother in Pomerania written on period-correct paper with period-correct ink. Photographs doctored with painstaking analog techniques to show Bauer with his unit in Russia. A small, jagged scar on his left hand, noted in Bauer's SS service file as the result of shrapnel from a Soviet grenade, was recreated on Rosenthal's hand by a Mossad plastic surgeon. Rosenthal spent 6 months in a secluded safe house on a kibbutz in the Negev desert, living as Franz Bauer. He was tutored by a former Wehrmacht major, a German Jew who had been forced to serve, learning the proper way to click his heels and salute. The specific marching cadence of the 11th SS Volunteer Panzer Grenadier Division Nordland. The slang used by soldiers on the Eastern Front. He read nothing but Nazi literature. Rosenberg, Goebbels, Streicher. He listened to nothing but Wagner and the recorded speeches of the Führer. Malkin's psychologists monitored him constantly, their reports noting his increasing detachment. They were not just training an agent. They were brainwashing him. They were building a personality so robust, so deeply ingrained, that it could withstand the scrutiny of the very men who had invented the ideology. The final piece of the puzzle was the trigger. How to make contact. They couldn't just have him show up in Buenos Aires and ask to join. The network was pathologically paranoid. The answer came from a Mossad asset inside a Spanish shipping company, a firm long suspected of being used by Odessa to move money and personnel. The asset reported that a known Odessa recruiter in Madrid, a man named Otto Skorzeny, the same legendary SS commando who had rescued Mussolini from a mountaintop prison, was looking for reliable men for business opportunities in South America. The plan was set. Rosenthal, as Bauer, would travel to Madrid and allow himself to be recruited. He would be a man adrift, a loyal soldier of the Reich who had lost his purpose and his country. He would let them find him. He was the bait in a trap designed to catch a monster. The core of the operation began in a dimly lit, wood-paneled bar in Madrid's Old Quarter. Rosenthal, now fully inhabiting the persona of Franz Bauer, sat nursing a glass of Mahou beer. He looked the part. His suit was worn but immaculately clean. His posture was ramrod straight, and his eyes held the haunted, bitter gaze of a man who believed the world had betrayed him. He spoke to the bartender in German, complaining about the Franco regime, the communists, the moral decay of modern society. He did this for 3 consecutive nights. On the 4th night, a man sat down next to him. A large man, well over 6 feet tall, with a heavily scarred face from his dueling days. It was Skorzeny. The conversation was brief, elliptical, a dance of coded language. Skorzeny spoke of old comrades, of the injustice of the Nuremberg trials, of a new world being built by strong men who were not afraid of their convictions. Bauer responded with the correct phrases, the quiet, disciplined fanaticism he had practiced for months. He spoke of the betrayal by the general staff and the purity of the Waffen-SS. A week later, after a series of subtle background checks, he was on a freighter bound for Buenos Aires. his new life packed in a single, worn leather suitcase. The insertion was flawless. In Argentina, he was met by a lower-level functionary of the network. For the next 6 months, he was subjected to a continuous, low-grade interrogation. He worked as a security supervisor at a German-owned ball-bearing factory, a known front for Odessa's financial dealings. His every move was monitored. His modest apartment was searched on 3 separate occasions. He was drawn into long, drunken conversations designed to trip him up, to expose a flaw in his meticulously constructed legend. He never wavered. He was patient, disciplined, and utterly convincing in his portrayal of a broken but unbowed soldier of the Third Reich. Finally, he was granted a meeting with the man himself, Klaus Richter. The meeting at the Estancia was the final interview. Adler, as Bauer, passed the test. He showed the correct mixture of ideological fire and deference to a superior officer. He spoke of the brutal fighting on the Eastern Front with a convincing blend of cold hatred and brutal nostalgia. He was accepted. He was now inside the perimeter. The technology Mossad provided for Operation Phantom was state-of-the-art for the 1960s. But its severe limitations created the mission's constant, underlying tension. His primary intelligence-gathering tool was a Minox B sub-miniature camera, cleverly concealed inside a functioning Ronson cigarette lighter. The camera used 8 11mm film cartridges, each capable of holding 50 high-resolution exposures. The problem was developing the film. He couldn't take it to a local Kodak shop. The film had to be extracted from the lighter's chassis, a delicate operation, placed in a waterproof micro-container the size of a shirt button, and passed to his handler via a physical dead drop. His communication device was a TAR-21 shortwave burst transmitter, a device the size of a shoebox hidden within the chassis of a large Telefunken radio in his apartment. A burst transmission compresses a Morse code message lasting several minutes into a signal lasting less than a second, making it incredibly difficult for enemy direction finders to get a fix. The problem was Richter's Estancia. Mossad Signals Intelligence SIGINT team, operating from a diplomatic van in Buenos Aires, confirmed the ranch was continuously swept for unauthorized radio frequencies by sophisticated German-made equipment. Any transmission from the property would be instantly detected and located. This meant Adler could only transmit from his apartment in the city, creating a dangerous and often agonizing delay between gathering critical intelligence and reporting it. His only other communication method was the dead drop. The primary location was a loose brick in a wall behind a bustling marketplace in the La Boca district. He would leave the film canister. His handler, a Katza posing as an antiquarian bookseller named Matteo, would leave a new canister along with instructions hidden in the spine of a prearranged book. Every dead drop was a moment of maximum exposure, a calculated risk that frayed his nerves. Adler's initial intelligence gathering was a slow, painstaking process of accretion. He worked as one of Richter's chief aides, managing the vast ranch's logistics. He photographed shipping manifests for cattle exports that didn't match the actual herd size, rosters of employees, many with their former SS service numbers listed next to their names, and the license plates of the steady stream of visitors. He documented the ranch's formidable security, armed patrols in jeeps, trained German shepherds, and a permanent checkpoint on the only road leading to the property, manned by men armed with FN-FAL battle rifles. He confirmed that the ranch was more than a ranch. It was a fortress, a command and control center for a continent-spanning network. He saw men who were officially listed as dead. SS doctors wanted for medical experiments, Gestapo interrogators, concentration camp commandants. They came to Richter for money, for new identities, for orders. But he saw no sign of Bormann. The secretary was never mentioned by name. He was only ever referred to in hushed, reverent tones as Der Schatten, the shadow. The first major setback occurred 3 months into his deep cover assignment. He had just photographed a ledger he believed detailed the flow of money from Swiss accounts to Odessa operations across the globe. It was the financial heart of the beast. He packaged the Minox film and proceeded to the marketplace for his scheduled dead drop. As he approached the designated alley, he saw it was cordoned off by blue and white police cars. Matteo, his handler, his only lifeline to Tel Aviv, was on the ground, covered by a blood-stained sheet. The official story, reported in the papers the next day, was a robbery gone wrong. Adler knew better. The clean, professional nature of the scene screamed intelligence operation. He walked away, the canister feeling like a block of ice in his pocket. He was now completely isolated. The network was testing its perimeter, and Matteo had been caught in the sweep. Adler was blind, deaf, and alone. He had critical intelligence with no way to transmit it. For 2 weeks, he was in a state of controlled panic. He had to maintain his cover, performing his duties for Richter with perfect efficiency, while frantically trying to re-establish contact. Mossad protocol was clear. If a handler is compromised, the agent goes into deep hibernation. No transmissions, no dead drops. Wait for the emergency signal, a specific advertisement in the Buenos Aires Herald. But the intelligence on the film was too vital. It was the proof Malkin needed to keep the operation funded, to convince the political leadership in Israel that he wasn't just chasing a ghost. Adler made a decision that went against every rule in his training manual. He activated the burst transmitter. He knew the risk. The network could be monitoring his apartment building. But he had modified the radio, adding a clockwork timer. He set it to transmit at 3:15 a.m. while he was physically at the ranch, 50 miles away, giving him a plausible alibi if the transmission was traced to his building. He encoded a simple, desperate message. Contact lost, urgent intel. Await instructions. He then left for the ranch, his fate in the hands of radio waves and luck. 2 days later, a new bookseller was working at Matteo's old stall. As Adler walked past, the man didn't look up from his newspaper, but he spoke a single word, a prearranged code phrase. Contact was re-established. The crisis was averted, but the incident had a chilling effect. The network was actively hunting for leaks. His margin for error was now 0. The second complication was not from the enemy, but from an unexpected rival. During a high-level meeting at the ranch, attended by several powerful German industrialists and a Paraguayan government official, Adler noticed a new face, an American introducing himself as Mr. Carter, a representative for a tractor company. The man's Spanish was flawless, his mannerisms too polished for a farm equipment salesman. Adler used a long-range microphone, a device hidden in a fountain pen, to listen in on a private conversation between Carter and Richter. The American wasn't selling tractors. He was talking about mutual interests in containing Soviet influence in Brazil and Chile. He mentioned shared assets and the need for ideologically reliable, experienced anti-communist partners. Adler got a photograph of the man. He sent it via the new dead drop. The reply from Tel Aviv was swift and alarming. Carter was a senior CIA officer, a key figure in the agency's South American division. The CIA was not hunting the Nazis. They were courting them. In the cold calculus of the Cold War, experienced anti-communist paramilitaries and intelligence officers, Even those with SS tattoos and horrific pasts were seen as potential assets against the spread of Marxism. The CIA was now a direct threat to Operation Phantom. If they suspected Mossad was about to roll up a network they were trying to cultivate, they would not hesitate to intervene. They might even expose Adler to Richter to protect their own operation. The mission had suddenly become a three-dimensional chess game. Adler had to infiltrate Odessa while simultaneously evading the surveillance of a rival and supposedly friendly intelligence agency. The pressure intensified. Richter, pleased with Bauer's efficiency and unwavering loyalty, began to give him more sensitive tasks. He was now responsible for vetting new arrivals, men seeking sanctuary within the network. This was the ultimate psychological torture for Adler. He, a survivor of the Holocaust, was now the gatekeeper for its perpetrators. He had to interrogate them, study their forged documents, and search for any sign of deception, all the while knowing that a single slip, a moment of revulsion or misplaced pity, would expose him. One candidate was a young German who claimed to be the son of a famous SS general. He was eager, almost too eager. During the interrogation, Adler spotted an inconsistency. The man's story about his Hitler Youth Unit's deployment in the Battle of the Seelow Heights in 1945 didn't match the historical record. He named the wrong commanding officer for the sector. It was a minuscule detail, one that only a true obsessive would know. Adler knew it because Mossad had made him that obsessive. He flagged the man as a potential infiltrator, likely from the BKA. Richter thanked him for his diligence and had the man taken away. Adler never saw him again. He had condemned a man, possibly an Allied agent, to death to protect his own cover. The act ate at him. Another piece of his soul chipped away and sacrificed for the mission. It was during this period that the ledger he had photographed earlier paid its first dividend. Mossad's financial analysts, working with the partial information from the film, managed to identify a specific Swiss bank account. It was a numbered account, seemingly untouchable. But Malkin used the information to apply back-channel pressure on the Swiss government. He didn't reveal the source, only that Israel had credible information linking the account to fugitive Nazi war criminals. The Swiss, fearing a public banking scandal, froze the account pending an internal investigation. The effect on Richter's network was immediate and dramatic. A major source of funding dried up overnight. Projects were halted. Payoffs to local officials were missed. Richter became a caged animal, furious and paranoid. He initiated a brutal internal witch hunt, convinced there was a traitor in his inner circle. Adler was now in the terrifying position of having to help Richter find a leak that he himself had created. He worked day and night, poring over records, interrogating staff, looking for the ghost traitor. He had to walk a razor's edge, appear diligent enough to satisfy Richter, but not so brilliant that he accidentally uncovered himself. He deflected suspicion onto a mid-level accountant who had a known gambling problem, fabricating evidence that suggested the man had been selling information to pay off debts. It was enough. Richter's focus shifted. The accountant disappeared. Adler had survived again, but the stress was taking a visible toll. He was losing weight. He slept in 2-hour increments, plagued by nightmares where he was giving orders in German. The line between David Rosenthal and Franz Bauer was beginning to blur. He found himself thinking in Bauer's hateful ideology, catching himself using the man's phrases even when he was alone. He was becoming the monster he was hunting. The ultimate breakthrough came not from a ledger or a secret meeting, but from a moment of drunken sentimentality. At a private gathering celebrating Hitler's birthday, a sacred event for the inner circle. A heavily intoxicated Richter began to reminisce. He spoke of the final days in the Führer bunker. He described the chaos, the betrayals, and the unwavering loyalty of the secretary. And then he let it slip. He mentioned Bormann's escape, not to Argentina, but to a more secure, more isolated location. A place where the eagle could watch the world burn without being seen. He spoke of a final sanctuary, a purpose-built, self-sufficient community hidden deep in the mountains, accessible only by a private airstrip. He called it Colonia Verdad, Truth Colony. The next day, Adler searched Richter's private study. It was a massive risk. He had only a 10-minute window while Richter was inspecting a cattle fence at the far end of the ranch. Using a wire pick from a set hidden in his belt buckle, he opened a locked desk drawer. He found a map. It was a detailed,